Before we get started on this video, I wanted to drop a couple of notes in. First thing you'll notice is the title of the video says reinstalling a BMW clutch, and you'll see that from this picture I'm starting from a point where it's already installed. So I've installed it once, but I didn't follow the correct procedure, so this video starts off with me just explaining what went wrong. Because I think it's important just to point that out, and then I'll take the clutch off, make the necessary adjustments, and then put it back on. So that's the first point. The second point is that I'm doing this in my 116 trophy car, and I have a solid flywheel rather than a dual mass flywheel. And if you're wondering how that affects you if you have a road car, it doesn't affect this procedure. The procedure will work exactly the same whether you've got a road car or if you've got the TTV lightweight flywheel. So I wanted to just point those couple of things out before we get started. In my earlier video that you may have seen, I reset the self-adjusting clutch on a hydraulic press using a variation on a theme that I'd seen lots of other people use, which was based around bolting the thing onto a plank of wood and using a threaded bar and whatnot. Now, I thought it worked okay, but having put the gearbox all back in, trying the clutch does disengage, but it's right on the floor. You have to push it right to the floor, and bearing in mind I haven't got any carpets in this car or anything like that. I think if I did have carpets, it probably wouldn't disengage at all. So I've obviously got something wrong. Now, way too late, and I'm pretty fed up with myself once again. I haven't bothered reading the manual first. So I read the Haynes workshop manual, and the way I've installed this is not the correct way. Although I've reset it okay, and there's nothing wrong with the video that I've produced per se. In a BMW, for sure, I don't know about other cars, but in a BMW, you can't just do that and then install the clutch. It seems that what you have to do is you have to keep these fingers pressed in, right in, as you install the clutch to retract the clamping plate all the way back. What's more, when you do that, you have to lock the adjusters in place by putting a spacer in here. It says you have to put 3 spacers in, although I can't see why, because it's one ring. So I'm hoping to get away with just 1 spacer. I'm going to make a spacer using a bolt, so I'm just going to cut a bolt to length and push that in, and then I'll have to flip it out once it's installed. I'm going to have to be careful because I don't want it disappearing into the clutch, but yeah, just have to be careful. So with that in mind, there are 2 considerations here. The first one is, obviously you've got to have a clutch alignment tool in place, so you'll need the sort that goes at least flush with this ring, if not slightly lower. So that's the first thing. And I do have one of those. If I remove the bolt out of my one, it's a printed plastic one, my one, but I think the BMW one is basically the same shape, but it's metal. So I can remove the bolt, and then I'll have to put the bolt back in to yank the thing out. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is you do need the tool that holds pressure on these fingers. Now, I read that you can do it with the Haynes manual says you can do it with a piece of threaded bar. But I'm blowed if I can see how. Because you'll see later, the tool hooks into these gaps here, and it comes up sort of this direction, and so the pressure is against the cover plate. If you put a threaded bar in there, I just don't see how it can work. But anyway, so I'm going to do it the way it says, with a hope of correcting the issue. Now, I have posted a thing on Facebook and lots of people have said you need to bleed the clutch. Now, they could be right. They could be right. And I have bled the clutch a number of times, but these, well, from what I gather, these are notoriously difficult to bleed completely, and some people bleed them from the bottom and force fluid back up into the reservoir. Some people do it the normal way. I guess I could do it actually with it hanging off the car like this. It's hanging down at the moment. I could just bleed it there. So I might do that to see if I can get more air out of it. But the reason that I've gone to all this trouble is because really I don't want to take the gearbox out of this again. I mean, this is, do you know, I've literally lost count. This is either the fourth or fifth time, and I can't remember. I think it's the fifth time in the last 3 weeks that I've taken the gearbox out. For a variety of reasons that I won't bother going into, but yeah, so I really didn't want to take it out, but I've taken it out so many times now, it now takes me 90 minutes to get the gearbox out, which probably, if I was working in a in a professional workshop, that probably wouldn't be that impressive, but seems pretty good to me. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove the cover plate. We're going to start from scratch. We're going to reset the adjuster. It looks as though it's probably reset as far as it's going to go anyway, but I'll double check. I'll put the spacer in, leave the clamp on, put it all back in place and follow the instructions as per the workshop manual. Okay, so you see the retraction tool installed. This is the tool from Laser. Part number 7095. It was £105. You can pay 180 for them apparently, but I found a place that did, I think it was Tool Den. Anyway, do a search, £105 I think for this. Now there is a matching tool. It's a circular thing with two little handles on it that you can use to lock the self-adjusters in place. But according to my Haynes manual, my Haynes workshop manual, you can just use a spacer to hold it in place in a retracted position. So let me show you the spacer. Let's look at the difference between doing this now as I've got it set up now and the way I had it when I put it in last time. The big difference, and there goes the spacer, is if you look at that edge on, hopefully you can see that the clamping plate is flush with the surface of the cover plate, with the you know, the bolting surface of the cover plate. Now, although I haven't reset my other clutch, this one's sprung open, but actually even with the clutch reset, the clamping plate was in this sort of position so that when I bolted it on, the bolts were actually pulling, you know, squeezing the diaphragm spring or whatever and pushing the clamping plate backwards. And you could hear it because as you wound the bolts in, and I'm a bit worried I've done this, but I don't think it's done any damage as far as I can tell. But as you tightened up the cover bolts, there was a creaking noise coming from the clutch as the diaphragm spring was compressing. So this is, so the situation with it now is very different from how it was. You know, having that flush now is quite different. And in fact, you can see these stud things have come right out. That's interesting that they should clash on that. I'm wondering if I should reposition this. Yeah, maybe this tool should be positioned on above the dowels, where the dowels go. because there are 3 of those and I think they're equally spaced. Yeah, I think they are. Okay, so this might not be the correct position, so let's reposition it, and I'll go again. Sorry to keep messing you around, but I don't want to delete this footage out of the video, because these are the sorts of things you're going to face. I keep making mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. I'd rather you saw me making them than you have to go through the pain of, having the same problem. Right, so instead of going for the gaps above these rivet things, what we're going to do is rotate it to that position there. And now this is where the dowels go. And let's wind that down. Of course, if you're doing this, if you're installing a new clutch, that's interesting the way that slips like that. If you're installing a new clutch, you don't have this issue at all, because you have that funny spiral thing in the middle of the clutch that you don't take out until the clutch is fully installed. So in that case, that's still there. In that case, everything retracts anyway, So it's all like this. It's all already retracted, rather than actually using the tool to retract the clutch plate. I tell you what, be careful where you put your fingers with this, because these springs are pretty strong. So now, instead of that being just flush, this clamping plate being flush with the cover, it's actually slightly below now. And the reason is because that's why I wanted to take it out, is because this rivet, if you can just see that in the foreground, this rivet was binding against the leg of the retraction tool, and so it wasn't coming all the way back. So that would have been true in the other positions. So this is definitely the right position. The cutouts above the dowels, that looks to me to be the right position. I might be proven wrong. Of course, I could use the cutouts above the bolts and then just put the other 3 bolts in, remove the tool, and then put the remaining 3 bolts in. So that's a possibility. But I don't think the dowels are very long, so I think we should be okay. Anyway, we'll give that a go, and we'll see how we get on with that. So let me explain what we're going to do here. First thing you notice is this block of wood is basically used to lock the flywheel in position. It's just jammed against the ring gear. At some point I'm going to have to get one of these proper locking tools, which have little teeth that sort of lock in there, and then you put a bolt through there. I should get one, because this is a bit of a nuisance, this thing. It works, but it's okay. And luckily you don't have to put a great deal of force into the cover bolts, because the torque setting is not that high. Okay, so first thing we've got to do is put the cover plate on, and with my centralising tool, and push that in, so that holds that in place. So this is, if you've got a tool to centre the driven plate, sorry, I said cover plate, didn't I? Centre plate. If you've got a tool to centre this driven plate that's a really long one, that won't work with the compression tool. Now notice that some of the compression tools that are available, such as the one from US Pro, the compression tool central thread that screws in and compresses the fingers on the clutch, it's hollow, and you can put a centralising tool through it. So that's the alternative, but I've got this sort, so I'll leave this in place. It's got a little bolt hole in it, which I'll put a bolt in later to yank it out once I've got the clutch in place. So that's the first thing. Okay, now the next thing is to put the cover plate in. What I'm going to do, I want to Loctite them in, but I'm going to fit 3 bolts without Loctite just to hold it in position, and then I'll take those, then I'll put in 3 more with Loctite, and then I'll take the original 3 out and do those. So one thing I do want to do is, I need to make sure I remember which ones I've done and which are which. Okay, so these are the dowels that we talked about. I'm sort of a little bit more nervous than I was before about the dowels not fouling with the locking tool, but let's have a go and see what happens. So that's the spacer thing that I had has just fallen out. Now I'm going to have to put that back on for when I unwind the tool. So is that in the right position? Let's see if we can get this in. Okay, it has cleared the tool, so I think we're okay. Now I need to put the locking thing back in, and that's that one. I've got so many, I've got so many clutch cover bolts under here. I need to make sure I've got the right one. I hope that's the right one. Yeah, I had it jammed against that, didn't I? That's not very good. What I should have done is cut this shorter so that it jams against the base part. Okay, so there's a lesson for you. If you're going to do this, make sure it jams against this piece, not against this upper piece, because it doesn't locate very well. Anyway, let's get some cover bolts in. Put one in there. See if I can move out of the way of the camera. One over this side. And then another one at the top. Yeah, there. Right, now I need to do those up and just make sure I've got the right Allen key thing here. I have. Just stick that on my... I bought myself one of these Milwaukee power wrenches. It's a bit of an indulgence, but quite honestly, I've only had it for a day and I've been using it almost non-stop. So it's probably one of the better things that I've bought. There's a few tools I've bought that I use all the time. Dremel is the other thing. I use my Dremel every single week. It's been a really good investment. Right. I'm not doing them up to torque. I'm trying to do it quite softly so that I'll use a torque wrench to get them into the perfect setting. Anyway, I've got to take these ones off, haven't I? Because I don't have Loctite on them. Right, now I should be able to remove the tool, but it's important that as I remove it, this has got to stay in place because I think this is going to ping out, or the adjuster is going to activate. So now we start to undo this, and obviously, as I said earlier, for goodness sake, mind your fingers. You could really do yourself some damage, I think, if you're not careful. It's not gripped yet. I'm not sure at what point it'll grip. Well, that's interesting. It seems to be opening up more than it was before. Oh, wow. Okay, that probably means it's about to ping. Try and hold that in position. Oh, okay. Well, nothing's happened. Nothing has actually happened. I mean, it hasn't actually... And bearing in mind, now I've got it in place, actually I want to remove this, so that can actually come out now. I take it that sometimes it does open, you know. Now with this tool, what you have to do is wind this back to open the legs. There you go. Okay, So, barring me actually putting in more bolts with Loctite and torquing it all up, I need to pull the centre, you know, the centralising thing out, but that supposedly is done. Now, I will drop another piece of video in here showing what it was like when I installed it last time. But if my memory serves me correctly, I'm sure these fingers were lower. They were closer to the fixed central ring thing. Yeah, it's not convincing. The one on the right is before I took it off this time round. Although I have to say, when I installed it, the fingers may have been in a different position. But it turns out, which we'll see later, that it still has made a difference, and I guess it's to do with the relative position of the clamping plate before installation. Doing this makes that quite different, where it's, you know, that clamping plate is just below the surface of the cover. Okay, so torquing to 34 Newton meters. You can see I've got my piece of wood in here. That one's done. Just go opposite, you know, the usual opposites thing. That's quite tight anyway. And there they are giving a bit, so they're not over tightened. Okay, we'll go around quickly and check them again. So you can see I've put the bolt into the centering tool, and now I can pull that out, no problem. Quick word on the cover bolts. The Haynes manual says you should replace them every time. So I did buy a new set of bolts when I first, in my first of 4 or 5 attempts, whatever it is, to put this back together again. They've never actually, the engine's never been, it has been run for a short period of time, but I've never really driven the car with these bolts in place. But I don't think any of that is what matters. I think the reason that they want you to replace the bolts is because they come impregnated with thread locker, and obviously once you've used them once, that sort of messes that up. So what I do is I clean the bolts with a dye, you know, thread dye, just to clean the old thread locker out, and then I just put a small amount of Loctite thread locker on the bolts, and that's what I've done this time. So I believe at this point I'm good to go to put the gearbox back in, etc. So I'm going to get on and do that, and what I'll do is I'll pick up with the video once I've got it in place and I've found out what the result is. If this doesn't fix the low clutch pedal, then I'm going to have to go back to the idea that it's something to do with bleeding the slave cylinder. Yeah, so let's hope this fixes it. Bleeding the slave cylinder obviously isn't the end of the world, but at least the one thing I do know now is that I have put this together as per the Haynes manual, and it is very different the way I've put it together to the way I did the first time. So I would encourage you, and I need to keep reminding myself, stop thinking I know how to do things and make sure I read the manual first. I could have saved myself one round of this whole palaver. Okay, the gearbox is all back in, everything's done. Just to give you an idea of how long this took, so I started at about 9:30 this morning. I took an hour's break at lunchtime, and it's now 4:15 in the afternoon. So what's that? It's 3 1/4 plus another 2.5, say 6 hours. So 6 hours to get the gearbox out, do the clutch, put it all back together, and I've just run it and checked, and it's all okay. Now what I've found is it has indeed changed the biting point of the clutch. It's moved it further up. It's still not as high as I'd like, so I still may bleed it. But what you now notice is, and I don't know if this is because the adjuster hasn't quite completed whatever it's got to do, but it's more progressive. So although it bites, what I was doing was I was pulling up the handbrake, because you can see it's up on stands. I pull up the handbrake, gradually release the clutch, and you can, the revs start to drop, but it doesn't start to stall out until you release it a bit further. I don't have a clutch delay valve in it, so it's not that. I have a feeling I need to drive it to get to the final position, so I'm not actually going to do anything else right now. I have a track day booked in 1 week from tomorrow. What I'm going to do is take it for a shakedown run. And so I'll run it on the track day. I want to also get some instruction at the track I'm going to, so I'll do that. But actually, the little beauty is working again. You see I've changed the numbers. So I'm number 1 this season, which is novel. Mark, who organises the series, said the only trouble with being number 1 is you have got a target on your back. So yeah, that's probably true. But anyway, it's all done. So from a standard clutch refitment point of view, so if you've got a project where you need to refit your existing clutch, the procedure I've just used, and you've seen earlier in this video, I believe that is the correct procedure, and that's the most likely to bring you success. It does mean you need a clutch compression tool. I can't figure out a way around it, although I've read, as I said earlier, in the Haynes manual that you can do it with threaded stud and bolts and washers. I can't figure out how to do that. So, yeah, I believe you need a tool. There are cheaper ones available. This one cost me £100, but I've seen them as low as, I think, 65 on Amazon. So you can probably buy a cheaper tool. It's a bit of a pain if you're doing this just for your own personal use, because, for your road car, because you'll probably only do it once. Whereas in my case, I'll probably have the gearbox out of this about 3 times this season, so it's well worth my while. What else is there to tell you? The reset procedure that I showed in the earlier video, it's good, it works, but for a BMW, certainly for a BMW E87 N45, that isn't going to do you any good at all, because you do need to, I'm convinced you need to compress the release fingers while you're fitting the clutch cover. You will need a clutch center tool that will either go through the center of your clutch compression tool or is short enough just to sit in the clutch until you put a bolt in and pull it out, just the way I did. Other than that, I think that's it. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, please like and subscribe to my channel. And I look forward to speaking to you on the next little project.